Alright, so thought I'd do a video about just the tools that say just an everyday plumber would have. This isn't a kind of like a beginner's tool list or a super plumber's tool list. These are just basic tools that I think most plumbers would agree that you ought to have. So I'll start with a basic tool list. If you're just getting into the plumbing trade, if you're just getting into your first ever plumbing job, there are two tool lists. There's new construction and then there's service plumbing. If you start in the new construction side like I did, a good plumber will have a single pair of channel locks, a torpedo level, an 8-inch crescent wrench, and then that's basically it. If you're a good apprentice and in the new construction side, that's basically all that you need. But once you get into more advanced plumbing, once you get into start accumulating your tools, you're going to want two of these. I carry this one, and I've got a second set in here somewhere. These are good old Channel Lock brand channel locks. You can buy these at Lowe's or basically any hardware store. I prefer the ones that have the little divot here out of the front. A lot of people really don't care for those, but for me personally, I find that this grips pipe and hex nuts a little bit better. Next, I have what the Germans call Knipex, but I will be in the cold dead ground before I concede that they're called that. Until then, I will refer to them as Knipex pliers. This is an old pair. They make a better version now, but they have that same divot out of the front. They're very thin, and they have more places to go. And one of the nice things about them is when they're, say, you're gripping something, your handle's really close together, so it's like grabbing a full-size wrench instead of having your hands spread apart like you do on regular channel locks, where they're farther apart. Next, when it comes to crescent wrenches, you always have two 8-inch crescent wrenches. I carry those. That's good for putting on, angle stops, or if you're putting on CSST, flexible gas pipe fittings. Two crescent wrenches this size is good. I keep a smaller one, a little 6-inch crescent, like this one. It's about the same, a little bit smaller. Same style though. These are Irwin. They're pretty thick. I like them. They have a lot of heft to them. They don't slide. They only have a little bit of rattle, and they don't slip. They're made out of a nice hard steel. Next, for full-size crescent wrench, a classic Crescent brand crescent wrench. Full-size 12-inch, you can get up to like 15 is reasonable for a tool bag. And this is good for bigger gas fittings, for unions, for valves, anything with a hex side like that. Plumber knows what a crescent wrench is good for. A lot of people like to just refer to these as lovingly as nut rounders. And I'd be inclined to agree a lot of times, but sometimes nothing beats having an adjustable wrench. Next, we got screwdrivers. It's nice to carry a basic nut driver with different sizes on it. This one comes apart and has different sizes, anywhere from 1/4 inch all the way up to, I want to say, 1/2 inch. It's adjustable. This is also made by Irwin. I don't believe they make this anymore, and honestly, it's really not that good. It has some issues. Like this little thing keeps it from being a deep socket, so if whatever the depth of this thing is that all you can do. So you can't tighten up toilet bolts with this, can't tighten up tank to bowl kits, and honestly, I hardly ever use this anymore. Then you have different assorted screwdrivers, basic flatheads. Really, flatheads are kind of going out of style. There are still a few things that use flatheads, but honestly, they're basically just chisels at this point. And then, of course, a decent screwdriver, a smaller one. This is a Klein brand Phillips head screwdriver. I think this is a number 3 or a number 4. I'm not 100%. It's got a magnetic tip. Everybody knows what it's like to drop screws into a wall or just into the void where they disappear forever. Next, long screwdrivers. You got to have you a long screwdriver, also a magnetic tip. This is a Lennox. You can purchase these at Lowe's or any really hardware store. It's good to have long ones sometimes when you got faucet handles that are pretty deep, or you've got a shower valve that's got screws that are way back in there. It's good to have a really long one that you can get to. Also, this comes in handy for, say, on a tub wrench when you're trying to remove a tub drain. You can stick this in there and give yourself some extra torque, some twist. Sorry about my cats in the background. Next, I've got a striking head flathead screwdriver. I believe this is a Milwaukee screwdriver. It was designed for AC use. You can kind of see it's kind of got it tapered in there, and it's made to poke holes through ductwork so you can get your tin snips or your saw in there and cut that out. But I use it basically as a cold chisel or a pry bar or anything because it's got some real heft to it. That's 1/4 inch thick right there, square all the way around, and it's got a striking head. This is my second one. I destroyed the first one. It's got steel core all the way down. and it holds up really well. Next, most important thing when it comes to service plumbing, it would be the same as a new construction plumber, except we replace this torpedo level with a 6-in-1 screwdriver. This is a Linux. It's technically a 9-in-1, but I never use this side. The good thing about these is that you've got your flat head and your Phillips head that come out on that side, and all of our no-hub bands and CT clamps are all 5/16 drive, and this is a 5/16 driver right here, and that's good to get them snugged up until you can get your torque wrench out. Next thing, Plumber's mini hacksaw. I don't use this for a whole lot except for solid brass toilet bolts, and the way that toilet bolts have been made recently, where you have set fast bolts or some people prefer plastic bolts, this just isn't necessary anymore. I keep it on my truck because there's always that one application where I really would love to have a mini hacksaw, like trying to get a ferrule off of a piece of pipe. I can't find my ferrule puller. There's always some kind of application. Next, we have flexible water pipe cutters, PEX cutters. This is a Milwaukee tool as well, specialized for Uponor pipe. Has this little blade right here for you to cut your Uponor rings off. Has a nice blade on it, has a point on it so that when you cut into it, it doesn't mushroom or oval the pipe. So when you go to cut pipe, sometimes it'll just squeeze it and you'll kink it up. And this alleviates that, or it tries to. Next, PVC Ratchet Cutters. This is a Rigid brand. You just put your PVC and it just ratchets down. This cuts up to 1.25 inches. This is a good brand. They're expensive, but Rigid makes a quality tool, and these have lasted me ever since I started. Next, a good pair of tin snips. Any plumber has a good pair of tin snips. It's for cutting, if you've ever got to cut any kind of two-hole strap, or most importantly, any kind of plumber's tape. Some people call it strap iron. I know it's not the preferred method to hang things with, but sometimes that's all you got, and sometimes it's the only thing that'll work. So it's good to have something that'll cut them. This is a Stanley Fatmax brand. They're honestly not great. I really want to buy a new pair, but until these die on me, I just can't justify spending the money. Next, we've got needle nose pliers, Klein brand. You always need needle nose pliers for something, whether it's getting stuff out of a little faucet cartridge area, or you're just trying to grab onto something or far up into something, trying to grab. Anybody knows needle nose pliers are always a great tool to have. Next, side cutters. These are made by Crescent as well. They have some kind of fancy system here that supposedly makes them easy to close. Honestly, haven't noticed the difference. I use these to cut nails. When I'm driving nails into wood during a new construction setting, or I need to cut a big piece of cable, or I need to cut a big piece of wire for some reason, these are always my go-to. They have a lot of power in the handle, and they're pretty sharp, and they work pretty well. Next, Electrician's pliers. They got little strippers on them, and the crimper, and then they got the spring-loaded action and all that. These are just a cheap little pair from Lowe's made by Southwire. Sometimes we have to put on pigtails for garbage disposals and some other applications, and when you have to cut and strip your own wire, this is always a good thing to have. Next, tape measure. This I'd like to add on for a new construction plumber. This and your channel locks are your two most important tools. I always carry two, just in case I lose one. I don't like this one, that's why I don't use it. It's my spare if I just have to use it, and it keeps me from losing this one because I just really don't want to use this one. This Klein tape measure, 25 foot long. It has a 14-foot standout. It's on both sides, so it doesn't matter if it flips around on you. Honestly, when it comes to tape measures, I used to buy Stanley Fatmax, and I like Stanley Fatmax, but ever since they absorbed Craftsman, their quality has kind of gone downhill, and it's kind of give or take what you buy. They're all kind of iffy now. And honestly, Klein's really not that much better. There really isn't a tape measure that's been able to stand up to the abuse I put them through. All mine are bent. When you look at them straight on, they're all twisted, and that's honestly my fault. I know I'm rough on them, but you got to do what you got to do with your tape measure. Sometimes you don't have a hammer handy and just beat something to death with this instead. Next, a more new construction tool. We call them a Raptor Claw or a smooth jaw pipe wrench for commercial flush valves made by Sloan, Zurn, American Standard. They have a nice chrome finish on them, and you'll see that this is a smooth jaw, and it opens up pretty far. And so when you're going to put on those valves, you want to have something that can get on those hex nuts and put them together really well without scratching them up, because if you use a pair of tooth channel locks or a pipe wrench on brand new chrome, the customer and your boss will be very upset with you. Next, I got a lot of tools, guys. A good plumber carries a torch. This is a matte torch. I also have a B-tank torch. Both are turbo. I swear by turbo. They make the best torches. They only have one setting, wide open. They get extremely hot. I can braze up to 1.5 inches with this thing. I've done it before. It took forever, but it can be done. This torch retails for about $100, and but I think it's worth every penny. If I had to buy another torch tomorrow, I'd buy this one. This is a great torch. If you're going to go buy, there's some things, I understand as an apprentice you don't make that much money, but there are some things that when you buy a tool, just buy the best you can afford. That's the best advice I can give. Buy the best tool you can afford. And to me, if you're responsible with your money, $100 for a quality tool like this really isn't that bad. Next, we've got a speed square. This one's made by Milwaukee. It's not better than all the other ones. It costs about twice as much, but the tool bug bit me right on the neck, and I couldn't resist the pretty red and the pretty logo, and I just had to have it. You know, you got to have a speed square when you're cutting wood, especially in a residential new construction setting. You've got to be able to cut wood. You've got to be able to measure accurately and draw straight lines. It's also good for having your stub outs on your PVC and your copper pipe sticking out of the wall straight, in regards to, you know, stick this up to the side of the wall and straighten them out. It's a good tool to have. Next, a pipe wrench. I have an assorted amount of pipe wrenches. You got to have two. You can't just have one. If you're going to buy any two, buy 18-inch pipe wrenches. These are pretty versatile. Sometimes they're a little bit too big. Sometimes they're a little bit too small. But most of the time, they're basically all you need. You can throw a cheater pipe on the end if you have to. I choose to buy rigid pipe wrenches because, in my opinion, that's the best brand for pipe wrenches. These are aluminum. They're pretty light. I can wave it around with the one hand. They're my favorite brand. I've never had to replace them. I've never had to replace the jaws. I've never seen a rigid aluminum wrench break. I've seen other aluminum wrenches break, but I've never seen aluminum fail like that before. So I've got two of these 18s. I've got two 14s, and I've got two 24s. Some people have more than that, but as on the service side, I don't really need more than that. Next, we have seat wrenches. This is a brand, Pasco. I'm not going to open this up, but there are 3 seat wrenches styles in here, and there's a little wrench that you can stick on there. The old style, they're kind of a 90-degree looking wrench, and they're not very good. These strip out. You got to replace them. They don't last very long. That's why they're cheap. But when you're trying to replace seats in a shower valve, this is a must-have. This is the only way to do it. All the other ways to get seats out are, in my opinion, too invasive. And this is just the best way to do it. So you got to have a good pair of seat wrenches. Next, a basin wrench. Any service plumber will tell you that this is one of the most useful tools when you're up under a sink and there's a nut that was screwed on 50 years ago and it's corroded and disgusting. There's nothing like putting this on there and sticking your crescent wrench on this square shank here, you know, extending this all the way, it telescopes out, and you just ease that thing off with this because this has got a pipe wrench style jaw. It's adjustable and you can turn it, and it's got a lot of torque on that. And it'll turn your whole hand. It'll turn any nut you want it to. One of the most useful tools, and it's expensive. This is another rigid tool. They retail for about $45 to $50, but again, there's nothing better than having the best brand that you have. Next, just a pry bar. You have to pry stuff sometimes. It's cheap, Harbor Freight pry bar. Good to have. When it comes to tubing cutters, again, rigid. This is my big pair of tubing cutters. This is the number 20, rigid number 20. This cuts up to 2-inch pipe, 2 and a 16th OD, and this will cut all the way down to 1/2 inch. I've cut 1/4 inch with this before. It doesn't work that good, but it can do it. They screw all the way in to where the wheel is basically on the rollers. But these are expensive as well, but when you have to cut 2-inch pipe and you've got to have tubing cutters, all the other brands work for a little bit, but they begin to walk and they begin to spiral up the pipe. I've never had to replace the blade on these. It comes with a replacement blade on the end. That's the factory replacement. Never had to replace it. I will one day, but these have lasted me a long time and they work really well. Next, when it comes to putting in a sink, sometimes you have little hangers. This little screwdriver here is made for putting in those little hangers. It's the only thing it does. I've never found another application with this screwdriver, and I usually don't like buying what I call unitaskers, but this is one of the best tools I've ever bought for that reason, because using a flathead screwdriver for trying to put those little sink brackets on is for the birds. Next, plastic tubing cutters. This is the old style. It's a piece of junk. The new one's pretty good, but this one in particular, I hate it. I use it, but I hate it, and I need to buy a new one. All it's for is plastic tubing that you put under your sink for your P-traps and for your extensions and whatnot. This cuts those without you having to get your hacksaw, and it works really well, but with it not being open, if there's any kind of swell on the end of your extensions, you can't put it in there, and you have to cut it with something else so that you can slide it in here and then cut it with this. This makes a nice cut, but this particular iteration of it is really frustrating to use. And for some reason, I don't have it in here, but the final thing out of my tool bag would be a hammer. I use a straight claw hammer because a straight claw hammer, although not great for pulling out nails, you can dig with it, and you can break concrete with it, and you can drive nails with it. You can do anything you need. I use a 22-ounce hammer with a fiberglass handle. It works just great. And I bet you thought this video was going to be over. It's not. There are more things. I've got my solder box here. I keep these dental picks with me. Getting O-rings out of faucets, off of little cartridges, off of little stems, or running, you know, there's little trash, little calcium deposits in the back of the shower valve. You just run that around and get that out of there. Nothing beats these for doing that. Next, when you're working on water heaters or you're working on disposals, there's nothing like sticking your hand on a hot wire and letting yourself know that you're alive because you didn't test it with your hot stick first. This is a cheap hot stick from Harbor Freight. It takes AAA batteries. It takes one battery. It works just fine. All it does is tell me if there's power in that wire or not. And I test every single wire I have to come in contact with because I'm not trying to get shocked every time I touch something. Next, I have other tubing cutters. This is a pair of number 10s. They cut up to 3/4 pipe, 1/2 inch, 3/4 is what they're good for. When you're in a commercial new construction, most of your drops are going to be in 3/4 and 1/2 inch. For your toilets, your full-size toilets, you've got 1 inch, but everything else is 3/4, 1/2. This is best for those. They make a size of cutters called 15s that cut between 1/2 and 1. I would say that those are probably better than these. Unfortunately, when I was brand new into the trade, I saw these, I saw those, I saw the price difference, and I chose to buy these. I regret that, but I have these as well. These will cut 1 inch. It's just one extra tool to have. Next, for putting on angle stops, you have a stop wrench. And this is a tool that Rigid made. It comes apart. And you've got two pieces here. And this is how you put on your angle stops on copper. Really handy tool. You just stick this in the top and you just wrench this around on the back side. One tool, one job. Used to, you use 2 Crescent wrenches, 2 8-inchers, and they work just fine. But, you know, new things. When it comes to soldering, I take 2 different types of solder for potable water. 95.5 is the only thing that's legal to use anymore on potable water. This is lead-free solder. It doesn't work as good as leaded solder, but unfortunately, the way the law has gone, and it was the right decision to make because lead is toxic, but this works just fine on regular potable water services. For everything else, however, when I wipe a lead joint, when I wipe a lead joint onto a brass flange, or when I'm doing DWV copper, or when I'm doing, say, condensation drain, 50-50, 10 times out of 10. This stuff flows at a lower temperature, it's more flexible, it adheres better, it seals better, it's just a better solder. It's just made with lead. That's the only problem. It's half lead, half tungsten. I wish lead wasn't toxic because this stuff works so good. Next, I have assorted fitting brushes, 3/4 and 1/2. They look like this. Clean your fittings with these brushes. Your copper has to be clean. I keep tons of flux brushes. Those look like these. This is a flux brush or acid brushes for older plumbers. When it comes to flux, I use 3 different kinds. I have a small little can of no corrode. No corrode's good for new copper to new copper, new copper to new brass. On old copper, it can work, but you're kind of taking a gamble. Next, I use tinning flux on old copper to old copper, or old copper to new brass, old copper to new copper, because this stuff has little tiny bits of solder in it that when you heat it up, it adheres to the pipe, it keeps your fitting from sliding away, and it gives a better chance of it taking. Everybody knows old copper is harder to clean. It's harder to get as clean as new copper, and with the new lead-free brass fittings, it makes it more difficult. Those things they don't want to take. They don't want to adhere. The solder doesn't want to go on. And I don't have any in here with me now, but I also use C-Flux. C-Flux is another good option. I also have these tubing cutters. This is kind of a gimmick that Rigid made for a while. It's 3/4 and 1/2. They work sometimes, but within the first use, the spring failed. They got really rusty. It's impossible to take apart, and I never reach for these anymore. They were $50. I wish I hadn't bought them, but I did, and now I've got them, and I wish they were better. Well, that was 20 minutes of me rambling on about tools. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed talking about it. So until next time.